Welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our third day of the Council's Advocacy Days for 2023. I am really pleased to be joined today by two of my transportation colleagues, both of whom are on the Wisconsin Non-Driver Advisory Committee with me, and who I'm very privileged to work with in several ways. So I'll be introducing you to Nick Musson and Holly Keenan shortly. Transportation for so many of us who live with vision loss, other disabilities, aging adults, students, people who have low income, and people who choose not to drive, is often named as one of the most important priorities in our lives. That and having access to broadband service, because without being able to get somewhere or without being able to connect to the world through internet, our worlds become incredibly small. We're challenged on being able to get to and from work, being able to get to the doctor and get the medical care that we need, being able to have food security, being able to connect with friends and family, being able to cast our ballot, and so many more things. And and we all know that struggle because we live it every single day. So I am really pleased that you are here today to help bolster your effectiveness in being really powerful allies for transportation in this state. I think to be a really strong advocate, understanding how transportation in this state works is really critical, because we have a patchwork of programs both in our rural areas and in our urban areas. And sometimes there's big gaps between that patchwork, and sometimes the gaps are smaller. But in order to advocate, talk to a policymaker, and really be effective in our message, it's important to have a baseline understanding of those programs, and then to think about which programs impact me and how will I advocate for them. So Nick is going to kick us off this morning, or this afternoon. I guess we switched to afternoon. Nick is going to kick us off this afternoon with an overview of the transportation programs in the state, how they work, a tiny bit about how they're funded. And while you're hearing from Nick, I want to invite you to think about which of those transportation programs impact you so that you connect with those. Nick is from the Greater Wisconsin Agency on Aging Resources and is the transportation lead for that agency, and he'll tell you more about himself. Let me also note that Holly Keenan will be joining us as well. It's okay, Bob. And Holly is with Lutheran Social Services, and she is a mobility manager, and she'll introduce herself in just a second as well. Mobility managers are just critical linkages to the transportation programs because they are confusing. And Holly and her colleagues are aware of what the programs are, how they're funded, and can help you figure out how to get from point A to point B. They can't magically make transportation happen, but they are really critically important conductors on the transportation network. And if you don't know your own mobility manager from your county, I really want to highly encourage you to get to know that person. So Holly's going to talk with us about what mobility managers do and what they don't do, so that you have a sense of who this person is as a resource. So given all of that, I'm going to turn the drive over to Nick to introduce himself and to share about the transportation programs in the state. Nick, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So good afternoon. My name is Nick Musson. I am the Transportation Specialist with Greater Wisconsin Agency on Aging Resources, or GWAR. We like to call it GWAR for short. GWAR is a nonprofit agency committed to supporting the successful delivery of aging programs and services for 70 counties and 11 tribes in Wisconsin. And we provide aging lead agencies in our service area with training, technical assistance, advocacy to ensure the availability and quality of programs and services to meet the changing needs of older people in Wisconsin. And I am the lucky person that gets to talk to you all about this patchwork of transportation programs out there that I'm hopefully going to be able to explain to you in a simplified way. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first program I'd like to talk to you about is the Urban Mass Transit Operating Assistance. And all of these programs that I'm going to talk to you about have an associated legislation number that comes along with it. And for this particular program, it's 85.20. So this is the 8520 program. So when it comes to public transit in Wisconsin, it can vary depending on the specific locations throughout the state of Wisconsin. So large areas such as Milwaukee and Madison have public transportation systems that are pretty comprehensive. That includes buses, commuter services, and even light rail in some cases. And in smaller urban areas like Oshkosh, Eau Claire, Wausau have a more limited services that are available to users. And they can have, public transportation options such as bus that are available, but it is a smaller version of that larger urban area like Madison and Milwaukee. But in rural areas, public transit is very limited, right? Some communities operate a bus or shared ride taxi system providing public transportation for rural residents. Now, overall, for both urban and rural areas, there's a total of 81 public transit systems throughout Wisconsin. So those systems aim to provide transportation to all of the residents in those particular areas. Now, I'd like to note that when it comes to state funding, so when it comes to 8520 funding for urban mass transit operating, it doesn't operate alone. There's federal grants that go along with these these funding sources to be able to administer transit at the state level. And that is the 5307 funding, which is the Urbanized Area Formula Funding Program, and the 5311 funding program, which is the formula grants for rural areas. And these are the Federal Transit Administration grants that get combined with the 8520 grant to provide transportation, public transportation across the entire state. So next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about paratransit aids, and this is 85.205. So paratransit service means comparable transportation service required by the Federal American with Disabilities Act for individuals with disabilities who are unable to use the fixed route transportation services. So paratransit aids, this comes from the state, the 85.205, come in and are combined with the 85.20 funding, the Urban Mass Transit Operating Assistant funding, to provide paratransit services across for each individual transit agency. So when it comes to transit agencies, they are required by the American with Disabilities Act to provide paratransit services to individuals with disabilities who are unable to use the fixed route transit services. So this is very much connected to the fixed route transit services. Some requirements that come along with paratransit services are the service must be provided within the same geographic area as the fixed route service. And usually what that it looks like is a 3/4 mile radius around the fixed route service. So within that 3/4 mile radius of the fixed route service, the transit agency has to provide paratransit services. Now, fares for the paratransit services cannot be more than twice the fare for the fixed route service. When it comes to paratransit service, it's a little bit more costly to be able to operate, but they do limit it to not more than twice the fixed route service fare. And then paratransit services must provide curb-to-curb or door-to-door services depending on the individual's need. And then paratransit vehicles must be accessible to individuals with disabilities, including those who use wheelchair, scooters, or other mobility devices. Next slide, please. So next on the list is specialized transportation. The specialized transportation contains 3 different programs that I'm going to talk about. But the overall goal of specialized transportation is to provide transportation for older adults and individuals with disability to allow them the ability to fully participate in society and access fundamental community services. Now, there's 3 programs I'm going to talk about. The first program is the County Elderly and Disabled Transportation Assistance Program, and this is 8521. So the 8521 program, or the County Elderly and Disabled Transportation Assistance Program, provides counties with financial assistance to provide transportation services to seniors and individuals with disabilities. The purpose of this program is to promote the general public health and welfare by providing financial assistance to counties, providing transportation services for seniors and individuals with disabilities. Now, it really is up to the county on how they spend this funding that goes to transportation for seniors and individuals with disabilities. They usually have some kind of coordinating committee, and they come together along with the county board and every other committee that participates within this to decide how they want to spend this 8521 funding to serve these individuals, that is seniors and individuals with disability, when it comes to transportation. It could take a variety of forms. It could be a contract that they contract out to provide these services, or maybe they have some kind of wheelchair accessible vehicles within the county and they hire some drivers to provide these services. Or maybe they use these 8521 funds to help put together some kind of volunteer driver program to serve these individuals. So it really is up to the county on how they spend these funds to be able to serve these individuals. So every county is a little bit unique across the entire state. The next program I would like to touch on is the Tribal Transportation for Elders program. This is the 85215 program. The Tribal Elderly Transportation System program provides 11 federally recognized tribes of Wisconsin with financial assistance to provide transportation services to tribal elders, both on and off the reservation. And the tribe really has the flexibility in how they spend it, just like the county does, right? So they could use the fundings to provide services by hiring a driver and bringing in vehicles and providing those services directly to the elders, or they could do some kind of subcontracting as well to provide those services. But it's very similar to how the 8520, the county administers the program. And then the last program I'm going to talk to you about within specialized transportation is the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program. Now, within the state, this is considered the 85.22 program, and it's the specialized transportation program. And what happens with this funding, it gets folded up with the 5310 program. This is the federal program that provides funding for mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities. So this 8522 program and 5310 program get combined at the state level and provided to all of the nonprofits out there to be able to provide transportation services for seniors and individuals with disabilities. Now, I would like to note that within the 8522/5310 program that is offered, it goes to nonprofits, and it goes to serving individuals with disabilities and older adults. But the eligible, like I said, the eligible applicants include private nonprofits. And if there isn't a private nonprofit within the county, local public bodies like the county could then take advantage of that funding source. Now, eligible projects include the purchase of human service vehicles, or it could go to supporting operating budgets, for example, like a volunteer driver program. And it can also go to supporting a mobility manager. And this is a really unique to this particular program, this mobility management. I'm not going to get into what a mobility manager is because Holly's going to talk a little bit about that in more detail coming up. But just keep that in mind that 5310 and 8522 goes to support mobility managers across the entire state. Next slide. Now, I think you heard me talk a little bit about volunteer driver programs and how all of these grants, like 8521, that's the funding that comes into the county, that 85215, that is the funding that goes into the tribes, and then 8522, that's the funding that goes into for mobility for specialized transportation that can go to purchase of capital equipment and operations, but more specifically, the mobility management services. So those three funding sources that come in really go to help support volunteer driver programs. And I think that's important to note because we depend on volunteers when it comes to transportation throughout Wisconsin. Volunteer driver programs really help fill the gaps that our public transportation system cannot get to. And a lot of those gaps are in rural areas. So volunteer driver programs are extremely important. Volunteer driver programs in Wisconsin are community-based initiatives that rely on services of volunteers to provide transportation to people that are in need. These programs are often operated by local nonprofits or organizations that are organized by the government agencies, sorry about that, and aim to provide reliable, safe, and affordable transportation to individuals who may not have access to their own vehicle or public transportation options. And usually this falls into three categories. That could be senior transportation, so transportation that's provided by 8521. It could be usually it's older adults that are over 60 years old, or disabled transportation, again, that's provided by 8521 funding, and then transportation in rural areas. So some of these funding sources can, like 8522, that go to mobility management, and operations can go to help support volunteer driver programs in rural areas. Volunteer driver programs play an important role in helping us address transportation challenges faced by our vulnerable populations out there. Next slide. I just want to touch on this real quick. Vulnerable or volunteer driver programs are vital to the successful delivery of aging and disability programs and services across the state. Without volunteers, older adults and individuals with disabilities will lose access to healthcare, nutrition, health promotion, and social engagement. Volunteer drivers fill the transportation gaps where a public transportation system cannot reach. We lost so many volunteers during the pandemic and have struggled to bring these volunteers back. So it's super important that we continue to engage our volunteers and try to include them in the process. They're vital to program success. Next slide. I created a table here, and this just covers all of the different programs that I did discuss, and it's really more of a resource for you to take with you, right? What you're looking at here is the first row is the 5310 and the 8522 programs. And what it does is it breaks it up by geography area. So who can really apply for these funding sources? And it has eligible recipients, it has eligible projects, it has the clients, and it has the type of grant that it is. So for this first row, we have the 5310 program and 8522 program. You can see the geographic areas vary. The eligible recipients are private nonprofits. If not the private nonprofits, it's the local public bodies. Eligible projects, human service vehicles, operating budgets, and mobility managers. You can see that the clients are seniors and individuals with disabilities. And then you can see the type of grant it is. It's an annual grant. And for this case, it's competitive. The 5307, 8520, and 85.205, these are all formula-based grants, but you can see the different geographic areas, eligible recipients, and eligible projects on this table. And you could take this with you if you want to refer back to it. Next slide. Here are the remainder of the programs that I talked about, again, broken up by geographic area, eligible recipients, and eligible project clients, and then grant type. So you can take this with you. The next slide. Okay, I wanted to talk about how these funding sources are underfunded. And I just have a few examples to kind of prove to you that these programs are underfunded. So the first one I'm going to look at is the Section 5310 Enhanced Mobility and Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program. Now, if you remember, this is the 8522 program combined with the 5310 program. So this year, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation distributed 28% more funding in 2023, which is the program is over $5 million than in 2022. This is a huge increase, right? This is due in part by the Wisconsin receiving federal funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, the bill that was enacted in November 15, 2001. So we had a huge increase on the federal side. And even with this huge 28% increase in 2023, I have a few stats here for you. There were 74 applicants requesting 8.5 million in funds for 101 projects, right? The Wisconsin Department of Transportation provided 1.3 million out of that 1.71 million requested to fund 15 million or 15 mobility management projects. That's only at 83%. So even with that 28% increase, we're not funding these projects at 100%. Right? The Wisconsin Department of Transportation provided 1.6 million out of the 2.6 million requested to fund 19 operating projects. Now, these projects go to things like the volunteer driver program. We're still $1 million short. We're only funding those projects at 60%. We're still $1 million short, even with that 28% increase. And then Wisconsin Department of Transportation awarded 28 first choice vehicles totaling 2.1 million out of the 4.2 million requested. That's only half of what was being requested. So there's such a demand out there for these are vehicles that are going out to support all these programs, and we can't even fund them at 100%. So that it shows you that even at a 28% increase, we can't even get close to funding these programs at 100%. And then I have a stat in here, the state contributed around $959,000 to the 8521 program in 2023. And in 2000, the state contributed around $900,000 and $21,000. This is a 4% increase from 2000 to 2023. That's nothing. That's what, 23 years. And that's only a 4% increase. These programs are completely underfunded. Next slide, please. And then here is our mass transit operating. So this goes to the fixed route services out there. And you can see here that since 2001, we've actually seen a 5% decrease from 2011 to 2021, 5% decrease. So we really need to get this funding back to at least to where it was. And it's just such an important service out there. Now, this provides the fixed route transit. This provides the paratransit services out there, completely underfunded. Next slide, please. Here's the 8521 funding and the 85.215 funding, right? And specifically, it's the 8521 funding. This funding source, now this goes to the counties to be distributed, has actually seen a 17% increase from 2011 to 2021. So even with that 17% increase, I can tell you that the system is completely underfunded. I am talking to counties across the state every single day to try to come up with different ways to be able to raise private funds to be able to purchase vehicles and to support their services. Again, this goes to providing services, transportation services to individuals with disabilities and older adults. So I can tell you by personal experience that this program is underfunded because we're constantly looking for additional funding sources to buy vehicles and to support expanding services across the entire state. So next slide, please. Okay, I know that's a lot, but I wanted to try to give you the best overview I can of the entire transportation system when it comes to Wisconsin. So it was a lot of information all at once, but you will have this information that you can take with you and use with you when you go out and do your advocacy efforts. I'm going to pass it over now to Holly Keenan, and she's going to talk a little bit more about mobility management, a vital program that we need across the state of Wisconsin. Holly?
Sorry about that. I had myself muted. Thank you, Nick. That was a great presentation. I'm going to use that for some staff training so they understand all the pots of money. That's a really good resource. Make sure I get a copy of that. My name is Holly Keenan, and I actually work for Lutheran Social Services of Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. And I run a transportation program called Make the Ride Happen. And I'm also a certified mobility manager, as Nick is as well. I've been doing this work for about 18 years. Although mobility management is kind of a new career. When I started back 18 years ago, I was doing some of the work, but now it's actually a career and a career path for people. And I'll be talking in detail about what mobility managers going forward. Next slide, please. So I guess I'd start by just going through the actual definition of mobility management. And that is, it is a customer-centered approach to designing and delivering mobility services. It embraces a shared table of transportation providers, planners, and community stakeholders to collaborate, plan, implement, and maintain transportation services. Next slide, please. It includes local and regional solutions, customized to fit community needs and visions, and involves innovation in transportation service, coordination, and connectivity. So mobility management strives for an easy information and referral to assist individuals in learning about and accessing community and regional transportation services. So my program is based out of the Fox City. So I'm in Appleton, Neenah, Menasha area, and I serve 4 counties. And my job, or this program, was created because one person in our community identified the fact that for an older adult, it was very difficult to navigate transportation. And that private donor funded me for the first 4 years. And he had a personal interest because his parents, his wife's parents, were driving in their 90s and got in a car accident and actually died. So he knew from his heart that there was an issue navigating this. So that's kind of how my program was started back in 2003. Next slide, please. So as far as mobility management programs throughout the state, Nick kind of went through the different pots of money. And for my program here in the Fox Cities, I have a big diversity of funding. And I think that's good in some ways. It's allowed me to continue to grow and expand our services. I started out just in the Fox Cities, and now I'm serving 4 counties. But it's also somewhat of a accounting nightmare for our financial staff here at LSS, because all these pots of money have all these nuances. Some of them have, local match requirements. And then we get some straight funding, like United Way has been very supportive of our program. They've been helping me really since day one. We also have been able to access some of our community foundation funding in our communities, and that also has been an awesome addition to the funding pot, because that's where my local match requirement would come from, to leverage getting other money from the state and the federal government. And then we also get some funding through the Wisconsin Employment Transportation Funding Pool. That one Nick didn't go through. That funding is set aside for transportation for people gaining employment. And that's become an increasingly important issue in our state. And also with the employment issue being really hard on employers right now, they're looking to get anybody to apply for their jobs. And they see the benefit of maybe some people with disabilities could contribute in the workforce if they had sustainable and affordable transportation. Even if they just work 2 days a week, they're still helping that employer make or do whatever they're doing. So that's been a real issue for many of those individuals in our rural communities, that they maybe wanted to work but never could get sustainable transportation. So next slide, please. So what does a mobility manager look like in our community? So we have about, in the state of Wisconsin, I would say 50 to 53 projects throughout the state. And that's a guess. And every single one of us looks different. Because it truly is a mobility management project in that community. So what I'm doing in the Fox Cities is probably not the same thing that they're doing in Wausau, for instance. But what I'm going to go through now are some of the different types of mobility management projects that are going on in our state. Bus training and personalized travel training on the public bus is something that I do in one of my communities, the city of Oshkosh. So if somebody's never ridden a bus, we can provide that one-on-one training and help them learn it, and maybe make that a way for them to get around and maintain their independence. Some my program also has a one-stop transportation call center. So if somebody doesn't really know what is out there, we're going to be their resource. They're going to call us and we're going to figure it out for them and help match that individual with the program that best meets their needs. And if we don't have a program for them, then we're going to be challenged as a mobility manager to find a way to fill those gaps. As Nick said, there's a lot of volunteer driver programs all over the state. We all look very different. Most of our volunteer driver programs use their personal cars. My program, actually, I have a combination. I was able to secure 2 vehicles. So I have 2 vehicles that are driven by a volunteer that goes and gets people. So, but most of the volunteer drivers programs do use their own cars. Another program is a low-cost car repair loan. There's programs out there that help low-income individuals with getting their the loans for a car or even car repair. Next slide, please. Auto loans for low-income individuals is another mobility management project that's being done all over the state in several different venues. Just transportation coordination, you know, like one of the ways that we help is we work with other community members. So if there's a program down the road for me, if I can't fulfill that ride, maybe that person could, and we work together. So transportation coordination is really important. And sometimes it's overlooked, and it's not always easy to get people to share and work together, but that is part of what mobility management does. Some programs offer travel vouchers and gas vouchers to help keep the cost of the ride down and affordable for these individuals. Because even though there might be a program that meets your needs, some people who are on a fixed income can't afford that for all of their needs. Maybe they can justify using that $8 for the ride to go see their doctor, but that is not something they can justify to go get their hair done. So those are some of the things that can help keep that cost down. Now, the other thing I have up on the screen right now is our website. So the Wisconsin Association of Mobility Managers has a website, and it's on the screen here, which I'm glad to share these slides. If you go out on that website, it's going to really give you some good information. Next slide, please. And I'll put a plug in for Nick here because Nick was very instrumental in helping us develop this website. Okay, so who are mobility managers? Mobility managers vary from state to state and from region to region. I'm finding as I learn, colleagues of myself around the country, we all look very different. And some states have a very robust mobility management program, and some are in their infancies. And then some mobility managers within some states have regions. But here in Wisconsin, a lot of our mobility managers actually work in the county environment. City government is another. Some cities have mobility managers. Transit agencies, so a bus could have a mobility manager on their staff. And they're always trying to get us to network and help each other out. And we meet regularly with the Wisconsin Association of Mobility Managers to do such that. So if you needed help navigating something, you could call one of us. And if we don't know the answer, we might be able to call one of our colleagues to get information on a particular part of the state. And then lastly, I was going to recognize that some states have what they call regional transit authorities, which is a separate and a segregated pot of money through a small tax to enhance transportation in the state. Wisconsin doesn't have that, but we're trying to get our legislators to look at that, because I've seen firsthand the states that have the regional transit authorities and have designated money for transportation have very robust programs. So this is something that we as a state really want to get our legislators talking about. Next slide, please. So how do I contact a mobility manager and what can I expect? So the first slide that I showed you a couple slides ago was our state network of mobility managers. And then this website that I have on this screen now is for the National Center for Mobility Management. And this is the national website. So, and I kind of give the steps on the slide of how you can go on to the national one if you're kind of interested. You go under the resource tab, and then you can look at each state, and then you'll be able to see the regional contacts and other state level information. But if you're interested specifically in Wisconsin, I would recommend that you go out on the Wisconsin Associated Mobility Manager website that I showed in the previous slide. And also I can be a contact as well. Next slide, please. So some of the things they asked me to do is to put something together on what you might expect if you want to contact a mobility manager. I think asking them what resources they're able to share with you, and making sure when you call them that you have pretty detailed information. Because when we talk about transportation, there's all these nuances. It depends on where you live, what your county is, what, if any, disabilities you might have, where you're going. All those things play into what we recommend for you. So having details is important. And the same is true if you find gaps in your communities. If you know a specific gap that you know people are having a hard time getting from A to B, those details are important if you call the mobility manager, because that way they can do some brainstorming on connecting with the right people in the community to fill some gaps. And then also, I guess, strongly encourage you to consider being active. And that might mean serving on committees, or many of these mobility managers have like a coordination team that they work with. And I could give you an example. One of the counties I work with, Outagamie County, has a pretty robust transportation committee that and they are always looking for people to come to that meeting and provide information and issues or gaps and educate the people around the table who do this every day. So I would encourage any of you, if you are that kind of person, a doer, to consider doing that. But at the very least, testimony is very important when they have these public hearings. And you probably, maybe you know this or not, but throughout the state this week and last week, they were having the public hearings on the budget. And we had many of our mobility management projects testifying in front of the individuals. And it's always good to have a person who lives that life of not driving to tell their story. So next slide, please. So here is my contact information and my website if you're interested in learning in more detail about my program. And thank you very much for the time. And I think I'm supposed to hand it over to Denise again.
Yeah, Holly, thank you. Boy, now you all know why I'm proud to call Nick and Holly colleagues, because they are both rock stars. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, because it was a wealth of info. So I noticed that Nick has been answering some of the questions in the chat. So I will also touch base on those as I'm doing the advocacy asks that we would really like for you to have on your radar as you write and submit testimony to the Joint Finance Committee. Again, remember, I will send you the portal, which I know is open at least through next Wednesday. So this is a great time to put your comments to the Joint Finance Committee about the budget out there. And then also we'll talk about some legislation and things to be watching for. So I think we can move forward. Our advocacy asks, when it comes to the budget, over the last few weeks, I have been working really closely with Nick through GWAR, Disability Rights Wisconsin, the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and the Centers for the Independent Living to put together a budget motion proposal. And we will start meeting one-on-one with legislators tomorrow afternoon from the Joint Finance Committee and also the transportation departments from our committees from both the Assembly and the Senate side, to introduce them to this budget motion and to ask that they bring it forward in the state budget. And we've worked the numbers very thoughtfully in the last number of weeks. So I want to introduce you to that now. It's a lot of detail. You'll again get this in the PowerPoint. Particularly want to ask you to focus on a transportation program that matters to you. And when you talk with the Joint Finance Committee through your comments and with your state legislator, to really highlight that program. So the 85 to 21 program that Nick talked about, that has the money going to the counties, we're asking for a 10% increase above what the current budget is for that program. It's a pretty large program, so 10% increase, while it again does not fulfill all the needs of this program, moves us closer, gives us a bigger amount of money into the program than we've seen in a long time. Then the tribal elderly and transportation programs, we're asking for 20% increase. This is a smaller program, but as we talked about yesterday with our work on healthcare equity, we know that Indigenous people are particularly impacted with vision loss and other comorbidities and health concerns. So that that boost to tribal transportation would be incredibly important from an equity standpoint. The specialized transportation programs that go to purchasing the vehicles and go to the mobility management, again, we're asking for a 20% increase. A lot of the vehicles in the fleets are aging, and some of them cannot even support mobility devices. And so I've had mobility managers around the state tell me that if someone has a power wheelchair, they might not be able to transport that person, and they might have to transport them via ambulance, so even to a routine doctor's appointment. So the fleet really needs to be rebuilt. And then, of course, we really need the mobility managers to help coordinate. So that's a 20% increase. And we can go forward. For our urban mass transit operating assistance, we're asking for a 4% increase. This is a huge budget, and again, recognizing that 4% is more than we've seen in a while. It is concurrent with what the governor asked for in his budget, and it's also concurrent with what the Wisconsin Public Transportation Association, or WIPTA, is asking for. Then with paratransit, we're asking for a pretty significant increase here of 20%, because for those of us who use paratransit, we know that there's often long waits for our rides, and due to driver shortages in vehicles needing to be replaced. Their fleets are aging as well and running into some of the same issues with being unable to transport folks who use heavy powered chairs. And we can move forward. Lots of things in the budget that we are asking for. So related to transportation is that we want to see funding increases to the Department of Motor Vehicles, their customer service offices. So often now DMV offices are, especially in our rural areas, are not open every single day of the week. Maybe they're open one day a week or a couple of times a month, and they have limited hours. And we know that that state ID, for those of us that don't drive, and of course the driver's license, is really critical identification. We need it to be able to vote. We need it to be able to sometimes apply for other programs. And the limited hours that DMV is open, then that means that it's another barrier to being able to get the proper identification that is needed to be able to participate fully in daily life. And we can move forward. Another budget consideration that we're asking for is complete streets. So we mentioned this on Tuesday when we did an overview of the budget, that Wisconsin now does not have a requirement that when construction happens, that things like sidewalks or bike paths or curb cuts or accessible pedestrian signals or even walk signals are have to be included in the project. And so for many of us, we live in places where we cannot walk to where we need to go. And walking is such a vital part of the transportation network for people, those of us with vision loss and other disabilities, that we want to see the requirement that construction projects, building projects include these accessible features to build the complete network. And we can move forward. This next budget ask comes from our friends at Beyond Vision, which is an enterprise in Milwaukee. They are asking for a tax credit of up to $1,500 per year for people with vision loss for transportation expenses related to getting to and from work. So for your bus fare or your paratransit ride or shared ride services, to be able to get a tax credit. So that is a Beyond Vision initiative, and we're happy to support that. And we can go forward. So other things, there's a lot of advocacy that we can do that's even beyond the budget. So this budget window, really important to get your comments in now, because that window will be closing for comment period. Throughout the budget process, though, we will continue to issue updates, and particularly when it starts going to the floor, we'll be asking you to maintain your connection with your legislators to let them know what pleases you in the budget, and continue that advocacy work. But on a regular basis, there are important transportation things going on. I don't have a slide for legislation because there aren't current pieces of legislation, but things that we'll be watching for and helping on when possible is the change of insurance coverage for volunteer drivers. Nick mentioned in the comments that that they're required to have commercial insurance comparable to what an Uber or Lyft driver might have, which adds cost and then deters people from being volunteers. And we've been trying to work with the Office of the Insurance Commissioner for quite a long time and not making a lot of headway. So looking at legislation. So when you see an advocacy alerts come through about that, that would be a great thing to help advocate. The rural transit authorities or regional transit authorities that Holly mentioned, there has not been a favorable legislative response to that in a number of years, and we keep trying because they are so critical. So if you see anything from us or other places calling for the reinstatement of RTAs, that's a great advocacy outlet. I, besides serving as the co-chair of the Non-Driver Advisory Committee with the Department of Transportation, I also am on the steering committee for the Department of Transportation's Active Transportation Plan. And what this means, it's a statewide pedestrian and bicycle plan. We have not combined. We have not had an update to the pedestrian or bicycle infrastructure plan in this state since one was enacted in 1998. I have a daughter who was born in 1998. She's graduated from college and is an educator now. So that's how old that plan was. And the other plan, I think it's the pedestrian one, wasn't put in motion until 2001. I have a daughter who was born in 2001 who is graduating from college in 2 weeks. So these plans are incredibly antiquated. So I'm very excited to be serving on the development team for the state plan. And we will be doing public listening sessions and also public surveys. And a lot of those are going to happen online so that they are accessible for folks. So please participate in those. Again, we'll do notification about when those opportunities open up. Several of you participated in giving feedback on the state rail plan. I'm so grateful that you've done that. Right now, those of us, some of us in the non-driver advisory committee will be again doing letters of support for rail in the state. And when there are other opportunities to have you all support that rail effort for passenger rail, we will be getting notification out. So please watch for that. It's a great way to advocate for more transportation options between communities. And we can go forward. Let's see. Upcoming, oh yeah, a couple of things. One other thing I want to mention is that I am serving on a national expert advisory work group for a project with the Texas A&M. And this project will focus on writing a manual for transportation operators about how to make the fixed route system, bus system, more accessible for people with vision loss, because a lot of people find that the system is very difficult to use, including finding where the bus stop is located. The routes and maps aren't in accessible format. There's not information about where to get off the bus and how to navigate from the bus stop to the location. And so more people end up on paratransit with vision loss than really want to be in paratransit or really even need to be using paratransit. And as Nick mentioned, paratransit rides cost more than a fixed route ride. You have to make the reservation or set that up 24 hours in advance. And you have a big window of either getting to someplace too early or getting to it late. So many people would prefer to be on the fixed route system, but the system is not helpful. I will be circulating a survey nationally for folks that are blind and visually impaired, probably in June or July. And so when you get the notification about that survey, if you would kindly complete it, that will give us really important data to validate some of the issues and give real life examples as this manual is being constructed. And we can go forward. A couple other things, local matters. So Holly mentioned it, and I want to pick up on it. You really want to know your mobility manager. You know, they are all as awesome as Holly. And sometimes they're going to tell you that they're struggling to find transportation choices for you, or maybe it's not the choice that you would prefer. And that's not a reflection on them. That's a reflection on this patchwork system, but they are amazing. So use this person, talk with them, learn about how transportation, particularly the 8521, plays itself out in your county. Advocate for that system. So, you know, Nick mentioned that every county does it a little bit differently. So if the way that it's working in your county, if you see places where it could be improved, you know, find out about how to get onto some of these advisory boards, go to those hearings, get to know your county supervisor so that you can bring issues forward. And you can also advocate on pedestrian and bike infrastructure. I was working with a constituent in mid-state in a small city. And while it took him 5 years and a lot of phone calls back and forth and a lot of advisement, he finally got connected sidewalks that he can now walk to the grocery store, get across a 4 or 6 lane road with an accessible pedestrian signal, and now feels safe doing his everyday errands. Took a lot of persistence, but he did it. So this is a marathon, not a sprint, trying to get this advocacy work done. And really educate those county officials about the situation of folks that are non-drivers. Our system of transportation was built for people who drive cars, plain and simple. And we've taken a long time to build a car-focused system. A lot of the work that we're doing is flipping that on its ear to look at a person-focused system, and that people get to where they need to go in a variety of ways. So you can play a critical role in helping your local leaders to understand that 31% of Wisconsinites do not drive, and we need to have structures, infrastructure that supports that diversity. And we can go forward. And that's what I've got for you today. So we already touched base on some of the questions in the chat, but Jackson, I want to turn it to you to see if there are other things that have come up in the chat, and also to create space for folks that might have other questions.
Hello, yes. So it looks like that Nick did a really amazing job at answering some of those questions in the chat. So if you have any other questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to turn on your camera if you'd like, or on mic, and I can call on you.
And while folks are thinking, if you've got any other questions or working to get yourself unmuted, a reminder that these slides as well will come to you in accessible format. And before we have the, because it'll take some time to turn that around, and the links to the videos of these sessions, I'm putting together a list of important links from the last 3 days, and that should come to you probably Monday, realistically. The other thing I want to remind folks of is that we are going to be in the Capitol on May 3rd. So far, we're a small but mighty group. And so we would love to have you join us. So if you've been kind of on the fence about coming, I just checked in with Kathleen this morning. We have a lovely group of volunteers, so we can do sighted guide, because the Capitol is so much fun to navigate. And then we'll be setting up appointments, half-an-hour appointment with your state representative, half-an-hour appointment with your state senator. And that's a pretty awesome opportunity to be able to have a half-an-hour with those folks and or their staff. So if you've been on the fence or you want to change your mind, there's still time to do that, to get a lunch ordered and to join us. Jackson, is anybody else unmuted?
We do have another question.
Great.
Somebody wanted to know if we can read some of those questions that were in the chat, just in case someone missed. So would you like me to do that?
Capture that and put it in a document, because we can do that. So but you could do it quickly if you want to just run through them, but then we can also put it into an email.
Yeah, I think Nick did a really great job on answering those. So I think putting them in a document would be great. Also, I don't see anybody else who have their hand up or their mics off. So I think we're okay.
Great. Yeah. So if you can capture what's in the chat, that would be perfect. And then one other seed I want to plant with you all, and again, we'll get this in an email, is I have been talking with staff about starting like a quarterly advocacy chat group online, probably on Zoom, for folks to do sharing about what kind of advocacy work are you doing in your community, where could you use support, almost a peer support group around advocacy. So we'll be doing reach out to see if folks have interest in that. So watch for that email as well. So again, a huge thank you to Holly and Nick for joining us today and bringing us really a wealth of information. Thank you to staff for doing just an outstanding job with all of the detail work on making Advocacy Day a huge success. And then thank you to all of you for your commitment this week in coming to the many sessions and soaking up, and now we're hope that you've soaked it up and you're ready to take action. Have a marvelous rest of the day, everybody.